Okay, you want to press it. When you press it, put your arm directly onto the runner and simply press without jiggling it to backwards and forwards. You want to just put it down and press. So what you need is 8 pieces. This is a J roll cut up into the required size, which you can see on the pattern. And you're going to need 8 of each of 4 different color fabrics. Plus you're going to need your little cornerstones in black. This is also from a J roll, 2.5 inches. And additionally, you're going to need 1 focus fabric. This is cut at 9 inches, 1 9-inch square of focus fabric, and then a little bit of yardage to cut your border. This is a 1.5-inch border. You're going to need a 1.5-inch border. That's going to finish at 1, obviously. And then we're going to use one of the fabrics to cut a border for the entire table runner. Refer to the pattern. Using 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew 1 black cornerstone to each of the different colors. We're going to sew 1 black cornerstone to half of each of the 4 different colors, half of the strips. The other half doesn't have a cornerstone, it just joins. And obviously you can chain sew this for ease. Quarter-inch seam allowance. So the piece without the black cornerstone is going to be sewn to the bottom piece, starting at the edge of the black cornerstone to wherever it ends up. What you're going to do is you're going to cut this entire edge. This entire edge is going to be cut off at about that point. So these are cut at 12. They could obviously be cut longer if you wanted it to match. If you wanted it to match, it could be cut longer, but then you're going to waste all of that fabric, so you don't want to waste it. So you're going to start sewing this at the edge of the cornerstone. Once that is attached, you're going to sew this piece to the bottom piece, whichever color it is, and you're going to match up that point there. Okay, we're going to cut off the sides, and what you want to do is you want to measure the middle. You want to measure the middle point, and then the midpoint in each instance is the apex of the cornerstone of the square. of the little square. So you know you're going to measure from that point. The only point you actually have to mark is the middle of this your big centerpiece. And now you're going to measure on either side. You want to give it a bit of room. Okay, so we're gonna go with 7. We're gonna go with 7 inches on either side. I actually changed it to 7.2 because it gives you a little bit more room. And now what you need to do is to draw a chalk line on either side, making the straight line. And we're going to use a rotary cutter and a ruler to cut that straight off. Once you've marked both sides, use your cutting mat and your ruler to get a nice sharp edge. I broke my cutting mat, so we've got a very small cutting mat and your rotary cutter. Just to cut that off nice and straight. You want to cut that off nice and straight. A very good tool is this non-slip ruler. Oh, makes all the difference in the world. You're going to cut that off. You're going to cut that off. Cut it off. Now, we've done it 8 rows on either side, and we're going to cut the sashing for the border and the border. Now, you cannot give an accurate measurement for this area because everybody, no matter how careful you are, you're going to sew it slightly different. So to be absolutely certain that it's going to fit, you need to measure. You need to measure. You need to measure this area. And now the finishing, there are several ways. Depending on the length, you can either add in an extra piece here so that you can cut this across, or add in an extra piece here so that you can cut it across. What we're going to do is we're going to cut this across and we're going to put our sashing here and we're going to put our sashing here. The reason we do that is because if you do just, add your border to a point, add your sashing and a border to a point, it is much harder to put the binding on. It is much harder to put the binding on. It looks nice, but this looks just as nice and it's much, much easier to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut that off. We're going to cut that off. Let me cut that off. And we're going to start by putting our sashing. We're going to start by putting our sashing there. We're going to start with a 1.5 inch sashing in black all the way around. And we're going to start by making a piece that is going to fit on that area. And just to be sure, you're going to start by measuring it, but it should be 3 inches. So you're going to start with a 3 inch, 2 3-inch black sashings by 1.5 inch. Once you've trimmed off your edge, fold your table runner in half and check that your both sides match, and now remeasure to see that you get exactly the same on both sides. Because if you cut it at a different angle, it could end up being longer or bigger. So, you know, that's the way to test and tell that it's going to fit perfectly. Now you're going to measure it, and we're going to cut. We're going to start cutting the sashing and the border. So 24 inches, this is what I have, 24 inches, 15 and a half inches. So 39 and a half inches is what I have. But measure for yourself, and then these sections must, these areas must match. Okay, we're going to add in the 1.5. It's going to be 1 1/4. We're going to add it in before we measure this. So let's do that.